I told you we would be back, now didn't I? The Lunaverse! Special episode, Prelude to Crisis. Countdown to Crisis! Chapter 1, Rainbow by Rainbow Double Dash. Exit Twilight. The town was called Ponizawa, and it straddled the border between Equestria, the Griffin Kingdoms, and Kunja. Ages passed when Latigo had been a sovereign nation. It had been a town built around a mighty fortress that defended Latigo against the incursions of griffins and concephalic ponies both. When Latigo's king had died without an heir, or nor legitimate claims to his throne, nearly 700 years ago, looking like it would fall into civil war and fragment, equestrian armies marched in, Luna citing an ancient, nearly forgotten claim to the kingdom. There had been much that Latigo could do to resist Equestria. But then again, Equestrians had proven themselves to be excellent new lords, ruling with a light touch, and turning the Tisakiskis into full citizens of Equestria, rather than vassal subjects. In time, the distinction between Tisakiski and Equestrian had blurred to practically nothing. Within 200 years, Latigo had become a willing province of Equestria. Helped along, no doubt, by the fact that the provincial lord of Latigo was full viceroy within the halls of Night Court, second only to Luna herself in power. Ponizawa's great fortress was, indeed, the only true casualty of the Equestrian invasion. Equestrians had constructed a newer one, several miles away, larger and easier to defend, and the old fortress had been abandoned for years before somebody had the bright idea to turn it into a tourist attraction, a proud symbol of pre-Equestrian Latiski culture and military history. However, at this time of year, late spring, early summer, Ponizawa wasn't being visited by tourists. Late spring and early summer were times for beaches and picnics, not the explorations of old, ancient island ruins. Its tourist season was the fall instead. As such, the town at the moment was quiet, out of the way, and perfect for a pony looking to hide someplace familiar. Polite sparkled telekinetically, tightening her colt about her throat, and made sure her cutie mark was covered. As he walked into the bad part of Ponizawa, the lower-class neighborhood slums. Of course, if one had taken this neighborhood and moved it to, for example, Manhattan, then it would have been the kind of place to start a family and raise foals in. The ponies here didn't even lock their doors at night. Some even kept them open to make a breeze. Still, it was a place where she was unlikely to be spotted by any pony who might recognize her. As he trotted past one of the gangs of disaffected youths that Ponizawa had, one of whom was there a pleasant night, she pulled her hood over her head, offering only a curt nod to the pony who had spoken to her. She made her way towards the motel she remembered. When she was younger, her family had vacationed here, spending time away from business, night court, and everything else. Just spending time together as a family. They hadn't stayed at this motel, of course, but it made the town dig up an awful lot of memories for Twilight. Memories she wasn't sure she wanted dug up. But at the same time, the memories she suspected had to be dug up. Checking into the motel wasn't hard. About a year ago, she learned to create a sort of magical pocket just outside reality, where she could store things. And of course, the most sensible thing to store there had been money. House Starlight, her family house, was one of the wealthiest in all Equestria. Even though she was on the run, with no way to replenish her money, she still had a lot of bits held at the ready. As long as she kept her head down, humor covered, she could enter the small towns and hamlets of Equestria, and buy food or spend a night in a warm, reasonably clean bed. She could have done that someplace far away from Latigo, of course, but after recent events, months and months of hiding her face and moving futilely in the dark, she needed to think. And, depending on where those thoughts took her, she wanted to be in Latigo, as close to the provincial capital of Lanzarote as possible. She looked around the motel room. A bed, bathroom, and very little else. She couldn't help but think of her home, her family, her books, everything she had waiting for her at Lanzarote if only she could gather the courage to go home. But then, as always, she saw her face. Trixie Lulamoon, staring at her with a smug, arch look, convinced of her own superiority. Why shouldn't she be? She had fooled every pony everywhere. She had the respect and tutelage of the princess herself. She was the bearer of the element of magic. as he had a persistent and moderate respected authority as the representative of Ponyville. All of it built on lies. Lies! About her magical talent, her worth deck, about everything. She was a fraud and a fake. It was her fault that Twilight was on the run. Or so, Twilight thought for a long time. She told herself for the past several months, as she clambered onto the bed and under the covers. She couldn't really summon up the anger she felt for so long anymore. Found herself being forced to point out to herself that she was the one who overestimated her own abilities. She was the one who brought a mind's lady Ursa Meyer into a town populated in the middle of their evening time festival, thus to prove a point. Twilight sighed, closing her eyes. She needed sleep, first and foremost. Then, in the morning, she would make her decision. Twilight was woken by the sound of her motel room's door unlocking. She had always been a light sleeper, provided she hadn't gone on a studying binge of several days anyway, and her ears easily picked up the sound. Her eyes were instantly open, and only to barest of moments later, she was standing on her bed, horn glowing a bright, angry purple in challenge. Whatever was on the other side of the door realized that their surprise had been ruined, and so quickly plucked it open. Twilight found herself staring at a tall, lithe earth pony mare in the uniform of Ponyzawa's police. Twilight spoke, the pony proclaimed, pointing a hoof forward. You're under arrest for... The pony police probably had more to say, but Twilight's eyes snapped shut as her horn glowed and increased intensely. She popped out of the room, appearing in a flash and burst of magic outside the hotel, eyes wide, taking in everything she could. She saw, near the motel's office, a number of additional police officers, along with a gang of disaffected youths from earlier. One member apparently recognized her face, and was even now mounting and cutting her wanted poster, with a 1,000-bit reward for any information that led to her. Sky, meanwhile, teemed with Pegasi, carrying glow-gem torches that shine light down into the streets. And Pegasi noticed the flash of her arrival, and instantly called out to their companions, even as they entered their lights on her. Twilight gasped in surprise as he turned to run, and was tackled to the ground by a unicorn. A unicorn wearing a form-fitting black outfit with silver lightning strikes across his flanks, or a thick jerkin that felt strong enough to repulse arrows. The unicorn's horn glowed bright yellow. Twilight Sparkle, I am Officer Haymaker of the Shadowbolts, the unicorn informed her. You are wanted by the Crown. Do not resist your arrest. Twilight resisted her arrest by doing the first thing that came to mind, lancing out with a front hoof, catching the officer into the jaw. He stumbled, apparently not expecting her to resist. But by now, Twilight was surrounded by a swarm of police ponies, armed with batons and ready to subdue her. First, however, they would have to catch her. And that was not unlikely prospect as she closed her eyes, thought of a spot on the road to Ponyzawa several miles away, and teleported, only to smack into something. Twilight saw nothing but stars for several moments as she laid on the ground, shaking her head. By the time she recovered enough to stand, she found herself standing outside the old Ponyzawa fortress on the edge of town, just inside a bright pink bubble. A bubble that seemed to stretch the entire town as far as she could see. A bubble that was now shrinking. Twilight's eyes widened. There were only 2 ponies in all of Equestria strong enough to make a shield this large, and if Princess Luna had been making it, it would have been blue. That could only mean that shining armor, captain of the royal guard, her big brother was here. Twilight shifted from hoof to hoof, trying to teleport again. All that accomplished was smacking into the bubble as she teleported around town, trying to find another way out. But it didn't help. The bubble continued to shrink, its stare always focused on her as she moved and shifted around town. Even worse, the shrinking bubble was informing the police and Shadowbolts, or were there more than one, exactly where she was. Twilight's mad teleporting, then trying to break through the bubble with magic, carrying on for several minutes. Eventually, however, the bubble was only 50 feet wide, then 25 feet, then 10 feet, and smaller 4 feet, barely large enough for her to stand in. She had come to a stop in Ponyzawa's town center, near a fountain, her presence illuminated by street lamps that were swiftly joined by Pegasus ponies and glow-gem lanterns. Then, the remaining police officers, Shadowbolt, Haymaker, galloping alongside him, a white unicorn with electric blue mane and tail, out of uniform, and a look of near panic on his face, even as his horn glowed brightly. Twilight's heart skipped a beat at the sight of her brother, before she desperately began trying to teleport again, slamming her hose against his shield, even as police ponies formed a ring around her, while dozens of pony-style citizens, awoken by the commotion, went down from their homes or came out into the streets. Not like this. Not like this. She didn't want to see her brother again like this. She was vaguely aware of Shining Armor and Haymaker arguing over something, before Haymaker eventually stood aside and let Shining Armor through. The White Unicorn all but galloped to the shield. Police ponies parted to let him through. Twilight! Shining Armor called. The name cut through her like a knife as she froze, her back to Shining Armor. Shiny? Twilight asked softly. Shining Armor came around, tried to look Twilight in the face, but she turned from him, again and again until he gave up. She didn't want him to see her. She didn't want to see her brother again like this, trapped in a field of his own creation, trapping his fugitive sister. Shining Armor placed a hoof on his own shield. Twilight, please, he said. Look at me, please. I need to know you're all right. Twilight felt wetness in her eyes. She closed them, hunkering down. What are you doing here? She asked softly. Her brother tried again to look down at her. She again turned. Time off. I wanted to see the old castle before tourist season started. I thought maybe you'd be here. I didn't know how or why, but I knew it. I knew, Twilight, because I'm your big brother. Twilight stifled a gasp. Her tears were flowing freely now, and from the sound of his voice, Shining Armor wasn't having an easier time keeping his own emotions in check. So, you brought the shadow bolts? She demanded. Shining Armor hit his shield. No. Yes! Twilight, you're a wanted mayor and the most powerful magician I've ever known. The shadow bolts were probably keeping an eye on me in case you tried to get in contact with me. I didn't think about it. I just wanted to see you. Twilight, please, look at me. Please. Twilight shook her head. Not like this. I didn't want to see you like this. Twilight, please stop trying to run. I didn't want to see you like this, Shiny. I didn't. I was going to make a plan. In the morning, I was going to make a plan. I was going to decide to go home or keep at it, trying to show Lua Moon that I see is a fraud. But now, it's all ruined, and you're here, and it's not supposed to happen this way. Twilight, I talked to the princess. She said herself she's willing to be lenient, that you'll get the smallest possible sentence for what happened in Ponyville. She just wants you to be home safe. I want you home safe. Mom and Dad. Twilight choked at herself, hugging herself tighter. How is Dad? She asked. Shining Armor was silent for a moment. Not well. He's taking as well as every pony thinks he is. As he thinks he is. Twilight, please look at me. Please! Twilight shook her head. No, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. I need to. I need to. She tried teleporting again, but no avail. She tried again and again and again, each time running into the shield that was Shining Armor's signature spell. His special talent protection made manifest. Eventually, Twilight found herself heaving for breath, no closer to teleporting out of the shield than before. You can't break out, Twilight, Shining Armor said. Nothing gets through my shields. Twilight whiffed through the spells that she knew, trying to find a way out. Almost to her own chagrin, she did. It was an old spell, nearly 1,000 years old, one that she learned from the forbidden tomes she had gained access while wandering Equestria. There might be one, she said through a shaking voice. It was a teleportation spell. The most powerful teleporting spell I've ever found. I think the princess herself made it. So powerful that I based all my teleportation spells on it. They're just smaller versions of this spell. Twilight stifled a slight laugh. She turned around, looking at Shining Armor, smiling a little. I've never cast it before, she told him as she looked at his sister, burning her face into his mind. It takes a lot out of a pony. Maybe too much. I was always worried I might overchannel if I tried. Now you know what it would take me to overchannel. Twilight, Shining Armor said, putting a hoof on his shield bubble. Twilight, don't! Twilight put her hoof up as well, through the bubble, touching Shiny's heart through it, even as their horn glowed bright. Even as she recalled the spell, but to the forefront of her mind, just began dumping her magical energy, her power, herself into the spell. It was enough that there was an audible thrum within the shield. Enough that magic was bleeding out of it. Swirling dust and pebbles beyond the shield's boundary, creating a wind that whipped at the manes and tails of every pony, even as Twilight crowed with a bright lavender light. Twilight! Sayonara said, not shielding his eyes against the painful glare that his sister glowed with. Twilight, stop! Not yet, Twilight insisted. Not yet. It was too shiny. It's soon shiny. But don't worry, I'll... Twilight didn't get to finish the sentence. All at once, everything seemed to push away from her. Shining armor, the shield, the police ponies to town, was pushed away in all directions, bleeding out until there was only black. Black everywhere. Blackness that reached out and claimed Twilight's sparkle. The place didn't really exist, but if it had, it wouldn't have mattered because it had no air. But if it had air, it still wouldn't have mattered, because nothing could survive in the place, even assuming it existed in the first place, which it did not. If it did exist, and it had been there, some pony would have been there, would have heard nothing, because what happened was far too complicated for mere sound. But if it had not been, if there had been a pony in this impossible, non-existent place, breathing air that wasn't there, hearing a sound that couldn't be made. Crack! Chapter 2. Enter Twilight. Falling, 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 through time and space, then past time and space, between time and space. She was falling, falling, and didn't know how fast, or far, or how long. Forever, forever, ever. Past the original possibilities of existence, through the threads of probability, through the cracks of between space, falling, falling, forever, forever, thud! Once in her life, Twilight Sparkle had been drunk, so it followed that once in her life, shortly thereafter, she had been hung over. This felt a lot like that. Twilight opened her eyes, decided it was a mistake to do so, and closed them again, rolling over and burying her face in a pillow. She was in a bed. She didn't remember crawling into a bed. But then, the same held true when she woke up hungover several years ago. Perhaps there was a benevolent, kind-hearted spirit in the world that saw to it that all suffering from hangovers were deposited into beds. More likely she had been carried thereby. Twilight's head shot up as everything that had happened came crashing back to her. Her eyes snapping open. She was in a bed. A white bed. A white wall behind her and surrounded by white, translucent curtains. It looked suspiciously like a hospital bed. The fact that she was wearing a hospital gown strongly supported that theory, though she could not for the life of her identify most of the medical instruments she was surrounded by. The curtains parted behind her. Twilight turned to look. She let out a surprise as a griffin strode in. She instinctively recoiled to the edge of her bed, set her horn glowing as a dangerous warning. The griffin back stopped his pace, holding up his two front claws, whereas flaring in a natural reaction of his own. "Bitte, bitte, ich bin nuts!" he insisted. "Brücken das Sie!" Twilight paused a moment, before realizing how she was reacting was incredibly rude. Especially seeing as, on second glance, the griffin was wearing a white coat and had a stethoscope around his neck. He was a doctor. Twilight settled down on the bed, horns glowing, slowly dying down, as she forced herself to ignore her headache, and tried to rest a very small amount of griffin she knew. Ich nein spreche Griff, she said slowly, haltingly. Her pronunciation and syntax probably terrible. The griffin nodded. "I thought not," he said. As a Christian, strictly accented, but leagues better than her own meager attempts at griffin. He kept his distance from the panicked pony, even as he made sure the curtain was closed behind him. "I apologize, Fraulein. You should have occurred to me that you would be starting to waken up. Any pony would be upon seeing ein Griff." Twilight nodded, though she blushed slightly. "Where am I?" she asked. "Who are you? How did I get here?" The griffin offered a reassuring smile. "I am Dr. Siegfried. As for where you are in the Siegfried Memorial Hospital in Friedrichsruhe." His smile grew slightly. "This hospital is not named for me, of course." Twilight offered a slight smile of her own at that, as Siegfried continued. Wait, is this gonna become Asylum? No, I don't need any crazy Twilight in my life! You have found passed out in an alley in Frenderskjold, he said, and brought here. Fortuitously, I knew something of a unicorn pony anatomy. It is a Herbivore, and I was able to determine that you had overchanneled. It was already a simple matter of requesting either potions from Equestria or feeding them to you once they arrived. The griffin stood up a little straighter. It's lucky you were found when you were, Fraulein. Otherwise, you might have been unconscious for weeks. As it stands, it has been 3 days since you came here. Twilight's eyes widened at that. 3 days? She asked. All at once, it felt much like time had passed, and at the same time, much more. Yeah, Siegfried answered. Now, if you do not mind, Fraulein, I would like to examine you and see that you are recovering. Twilight shifted slightly, but nodded. The doctor approached gently, taking a thermometer from a bedside tray and placing it in her mouth, testing her reflexes, even using some device that Twilight never seen before to measure how much magic was now running through her body, her cruising speed of magical might. Unsurprisingly, the device, calibrated for typical unicorns, had its needle nearly spun off its holder when examining her. What are you doing in Thunderstruck? Siegfried asked as he plucked the thermometer from her mouth. Seemed satisfied with his results. Twilight glanced at the griffin, licking her lips. It was an accident. An accident? Teleporting accident. Ah, Siegfried said, nodding. He seemed to take the knowledge in stride. But then, he imagined the study of unicorn ponies was his hobby. Each phrases. If you don't mind, and I'm sorry, but I never heard of Frenderskjold, given that I was teleporting. The griffin smiled. You are wondering how far you are from Equestria? Not to worry, Fraulein. Frenderskjold is right on the border. No more than a 2 hours trot. Twilight pointed that. Equestria and the Griffin Kingdoms were currently at a high point in their relationship, but they had been enemies in the past. The principal duty of the Viceroy Latigo, Twilight's father, was to watch and maintain the border, just in case Griffins ever attempted to invade. As a result, Twilight herself had a very complete knowledge of all the towns and cities in the kingdoms that bordered Equestria, and Frederick's was not among them. Does Thunderscale have a different name in Equestrian? Do you know? The doctor put one claw to his beak as he thought. I think, he said, Ponyzawa? Twilight stared. Ponyzawa? She echoed. Yeah, well, maybe. I believe it was once a pony city, but there was a city. Linderland was divided in half. Linderland was a griffin name Twilight recognized. Their name for Latigo. Divided in half? Treaty? Twilight demanded, hopping out of bed. She stumbled. I was unsure where it not being used for 3 days. But they must have been more eventful 3 days in the history of Equestria, if what the griffin said was true. The doctor was swiftly at Twilight's side, eyes wrapping around her barrel to steady her. Bitte, Fräulein, he insisted. You must remain in bed. Twilight stared at the griffin. When was the treaty signed? She demanded. Was that treaty you mentioned, when was it signed? Siegfried looked confused. Maybe shouldn't have been yet? I don't say griffin. What treaty? When was it signed? 700 years ago. Bitte, Fräulein. I must insist you get back into bed immediately. Twilight stared in shock, before resolving that she knew exactly what she had to do. Buck around a few times like a bronco, causing Siegfried to stumble away, though she avoided hitting him. Then she was off, diving out behind a curtain and running through the hospital's halls. It looked much like a hospital in Equestria might, save a presence of griffins and lack of ponies. But as Twilight ran, she was once again struck with how many medical tools and equipment she did not recognize. Stranger, too, were the overhead lights, set into the ceiling, but obviously not glow gems. Instead, a series of long glowing tubes. Two orderlies appeared from nowhere. Large, burly griffins in medical scrubs. Wings flared and ready to stop her. Before Twilight could even think of what she was doing. How bad an idea was even to try magic right now. Her horn glowed and pop! Thud. Twilight lay still for a few moments on the ground beneath her. It was just dirt. Her headache returned, and she needed a few moments to recover. Eventually, however, she opened her eyes. The lavender unicorn found herself on a road, pine forests on either side. The air was cool, though not too cold, while there were traces of melted snow here and there. Wait, what? Twilight knew that the Griffin Kingdoms were colder than Equestria on average, being further north, but even they did not get snow in June. Twilight forced herself to her host, looking around. The landscape was intimately familiar. This was Latigo, certainly, and in fact she was very certain. Twilight galloped several paces along the road, over a ridge, and found herself looking down on Laswaya, the provincial capital. Twilight stared. That was not Laswaya. The road signs and points that Twilight asked as he tried, constantly into the city after conjuring a hooded cape to cover herself with, disagreed with her initial assumption. Indeed, at a glance, Latisoa looked the same as it always had. But looking deeper, it was little things. Gas streetlights were gone, replaced by filament light bulbs. Passing ponies she had asked told her. They ran on electricity, itself not an alien concept to Twilight. But seeing it utilized on such a large, casual scale was. The Laswaya that Twilight was familiar with, further, was built of wood and plaster, with cobblestone streets. But not this one. This one was built of concrete and brick, most of the buildings appearing to be no more than 2 decades old, 3 at most. The last time Twilight had been in her hometown, her father had been fighting with the city council against replacing the old iconic buildings. Apparently it was a fight he had lost. But lost in 3 days? This looked more like the work of 50 years. The thing that changed most, however, the thing that made Twilight freeze in place, was something that had changed, at a glance at least. Lasalle Central Park, at its very center, was supposed to be a statue of Princess Luna. Hewn from obsidian, standing tall and proud, gaze lifted slightly as she looked towards the future. Here, that was replaced by a new statue, one of white marble and of a different alicorn. Taller, with a longer horn, wings spread wide, and rearing into the air with one hoof held high, almost as though she was trying to direct the heavens. Even as she smiled beautifully down at the ponies that passed on by. Twilight crept closer, staring at wide eyes as she took in this changed, alien monument. The statue's mane and tail flowed like Luna's, but were striped as though it was just a rainbow. And her flank was adorned not with a crescent moon, but an 8-armed sun. Twilight recoiled in horror and when it noticed the sun. "Corona!" she whispered harshly as she stumbled backwards. A few ponies gave her sidelong, curious glances, and she collected herself quickly. This was a statue of Corona. The mane and tail were wrong, and the statue showed Corona with actual full eyes, not the blank, glowing orbs that she was supposed to have. But no other pony had a cutie mark full of the sun. Twilight put a hoof to her chest as she stared. Corona. These ponies in their alien city, so unlike the Laswaya Twilight knew, followed Corona, glorified the tyrant sun, the mad alicorn who would be queen of Equestria. How could they? How could they trot along on this wintering day? For indeed the day was wintering against all logic, happy and feeling content. Something was wrong. Twilight knew. Something was so very wrong. She began trotting, then broke out into a full gallop through the riot. Laswaya, looking for something familiar, anything familiar, and, let it be praised, she found it. Set between 2 brick buildings Twilight didn't recognize, was Laswaya's library, changed from the one Twilight knew so well, what she had spent so much of her fullhood in. Twilight charged headlong into the library, nearly bowling over several ponies as she raced up the steps. Those familiar mahogany doors were the one thing that could possibly still comfort her. Only at the last moment did she realize that the interior might be different. Wrong. There might be a statue of Corona in here, too. As these ponies, with their electricity, didn't even use books anymore. Twilight didn't know what to do if that was the case. Fortunately, that was not. Inside, It was the same building it had always been, save for electric lights and some kind of punch card machine in the front desk. But the layout seemed the same. Walls, the floor, the books, thousands and thousands of them spread out across the 3 floors in the basement. Twilight breathed a huge sigh of relief. Relief that was quickly tempered by a look at a calendar. A calendar that read November, despite the fact it was supposed to be June. Still, it was otherwise a bastion of familiarity. A safe haven in a sea of utter, low-level wrongness that existed outside. Twilight, nevertheless, spent a few moments looking around the library, wondering where to even begin. Well, she said at length, in a low voice as she began to trot, just like everything else, begin at the beginning. Once upon a time, in the magical land of Equestria, there were 2 royal regal sisters who ruled together, created harmony for all the land. To do this, the eldest sister used her unicorn powers to raise the sun at dawn. The younger allowed the moon to begin the night. Thus, the 2 sisters maintained balance for their kingdom and their subjects, all the different types of ponies. But as time went on, the younger sister became resentful. Ponies restless and played in the day, her elder sister brought forth. The sun slept through her beautiful night. One fateful day, the younger unicorn refused to lower the moon to make way for the dawn. The elder sister tried to reason with her, but the barrenness in the young one's heart had transformed her into a wicked mare of darkness, Nightmare Moon. She had vowed that she would shroud the land in eternal night. Reluctantly, the elder sister harnessed the most powerful magic known to ponydom, the elements of harmony. Using the magic of the elements of harmony, she defeated her younger sister and banished her permanently into the moon. The elder sister took on responsibility for both sun and moon, and harmony had been maintained in Equestria for every generation since. Twilight stared, wide-eyed at the story she just read in the Book of Fables. She was sitting in the full section of the library, having decided to start at the beginning and work her way forward. It seemed meant the beginning. The simplest of history books, and the earliest. As far as she could tell, everything was the same at first. The first ponies, the revelation of alicorns, the troubled time before the first heartwarming eve, the event itself when the pony tribes came together to found Equestria. It was simplified, of course, this being the full section, but for every book she finished, she cross-referenced with more advanced books, pulled from the adult history sections. She was beginning to be surrounded by a small fortress of walled books. The various foals, not to mention the library staff, were staring at her oddly, but she paid them no mind. This book, a tale of fables and legends that passed 1,000 years, was the first difference she had encountered. It was an amazingly huge difference. "This is wrong," she said, setting the children's book down and levitating her adult tome. "This is... Let a wind do that! She's the princess!" Twilight shook her head, even as she turned to the early modern history. Finding a chapter, she found its subtitle. Early modern history, 1,000 years to present day. Creation of the Mare and the Moon, and shaping of modern Equestria under Princess Celestia. Celestia. That was the name the books kept using for Corona. Not her more modern name, but her archaic one. The one referring to Princess before her fall. There was no mention of a tyrant sun anywhere. Information on this Nightmare Moon was scarce at best. "What about Latigo?" Twilight demanded, putting the book aside and flipping through a second, then third, looking. She didn't find much information, but she did find maps. One year, Latigo was a sovereign nation, and in the next map, it had disappeared. The Griffin Empire, Twilight noted, not kingdoms plural, but empire singular, and Equestria itself having absorbed it. She'd probably need to find a specialized book to understand when it happened. For a matter, this was Equestria. The sun-worshipping, celestial-ruled, electric-powered Equestria only barely resembled the Equestria she knew. It was solid, having observed Parfaded, Hevstad, Picerix, Cavida, Cabrera, Hippotamia, and even the island of Itaronia. For that matter, the Griffin Empire was larger than the ones he recognized as well. Several minor nations were completely missing, absorbed into Equestria, the Empire, or some other state. Most notable by their lack of 2 nations, the Hippogriff State and the Crystal Empire. Even more unnerving was the sheer amount of the unclaimed territory. Griffin Empire and Equestria may have grown larger by absorbing most states, but the empty land of sky-sharper peaks, as well as the woodlands to the west, were much larger. Twilight had to huff to her mouth in worry. Equestria was larger, and seemed to become so by gobbling up its neighbors. Was it a warlike empire? Her visits to Griffin Empire seemed to suggest otherwise, given how easily Dr. Siegfried seemed to acquire either potions for her, and the parties outside didn't seem like they were living in a police state. But there had to be differences. Twilight stood, looking around, looking for a social studies section. Let me take out a few books on this Equestria's government section, and flipping them over. At the very top of the government says Princess Celestia. The princess rules all parts of Equestria wisely. She also raises the sun every morning and raises the moon every night. In order to keep Equestria running, the princess created the Ministries of the Sun. No. Follow Equestrian fanboy. Calm down. It's not those ministries. Oh, God. Thank God. The princess has created each ministry is run by a head minister. The most important ministries are the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Transportation, the Ministry of Weather Control, the Ministry of Magic, the Ministry of Education, and the Ministry of War. And the Ministry of Image, the Ministry of Kindness, the Ministry of Wartime Tech, the Ministry of Advanced Magic, and the Ministry of Awesome. I'm sorry, I had to get my daily dose of follow the question jokes here. However, there were many more ministries, each with its own special function. Many more, Twilight echoed. How many ministries do you need? Twilight shook her head, adding her book to the pile of books to look over. With a glance, this benevolent Cronolan's government looked like it was a bloated whale of a thing, probably far larger than it needed to be. Glancing through another book, she saw no mention of a court, a forum where the duties of each ministry could be condensed. Indeed, it seems like, although the various ministries ran things on a day-to-day basis, to make any long-term plans or goals, they need to consult with and get the direct approval of Corona. Without looking into the Equestria's deeper laws, so like all power here was firmly in the holds of the princess, with no true check that at least conformed to Twilight's expectations. Twilight pried over back to her pile of books, pursued reading all she could. As he had a point of divergence, she could see what had happened here. It all began with Corona, or Celestia as she was still called here, banishing Luna, or Nightmare Moon, into the moon 1,000 years ago, instead of the other way around. In Luna's Equestria, the one Twilight knew, the first few hundred years following the banishment of Corona had been a period of rapid expansion and consolidation, lightning-quick games of move and counter-move with the enemies of Equestria, until Equestria was surrounded on all sides by natural, easily defended borders of hills and mountains and mighty rivers. But with the annexation of Latigo, Equestrian expansion had ended. The game had changed. Luna had focused more on setting up friendly regimes in nearby lands, or destabilizing the regimes of unfriendly lands. There had still been wars, but not for territory, but rather in defense of an ally, or to preemptively stop the rise of a dangerous enemy. And the Equestrians had created nation-states technically dependent from Equestria, with leaders who bent knee to Luna and acknowledged her as their leads. The Arxes allowed Luna's Equestria to remain safe behind its borders, surrounded by a wall of friendly nations, while those said friendly nations were seeing to their own defense and their own taxes without any money having to leave Equestrian coffers. Here it was different. Celestia's Equestria had expanded at a slower, more measured pace. Its interests seemed to be primarily internal, building roads and cities and infrastructure. When foreign nations were mentioned at all, it was because they were doing something to threaten Equestria. Wars were less frequent than Equestria that Twilight was familiar with, but Celestia's Equestria seemed to be often taken by surprise. There were all defensive wars Equestria had always won, but at higher costs had probably been necessary if only Equestria had struck first. Little attention was paid to natural borders. This Equestria, judging by its geography, but rather culture and race, wanted to absorb every pony nation. To its credit, it did so peacefully every time, moving in when the royal families died out, or when axed by the native populace. But the point was that defense and safety seemed to only be secondary concerns. More important still, but this was not as important, as the apparent goal of Celeste is Equestria ruling over all of Ponydom. The lack of concern for external affairs had been further what allowed the emergence of the Second Griffin Empire, born from the ashes of the first, as well as the enlargement of the Camel State of Nequa. The presence of a strong Griffin Empire explained the lack of a Hippogriff state. But still, Twilight couldn't figure out what had happened to the Crystal Empire. Getting up and finding adult books on government, Twilight found out she had been right. This Equestria had a huge, unwieldy government that was designed to specifically be able to keep things running, but not actually moving, without the direct input of Celestia herself. There were dozens of ministries, scores of sub-ministries, each of them reporting directly to the princess, often with a significant amount of overlap in their duties. There was no central forum like the Night Court, no true nobility class. One book mentioned that the nobility still existed, but the positions were ceremonial, with no temporal power, a significantly condensed hierarchy. Twilight was glad to see, at least, that on an individual level, the rights of police seemed untouched. Speech, assembly, press, right to trial by peer, all these guarantees from the world she knew were still guaranteed here. Twilight leaned away from the books. By now, her virtual book fort was not virtual at all. She was surrounded by a wall of paper and binding. Various staff at the library were giving her dirty looks at the thought of the reshelving they would have to do, when they could all see her past all the tomes. She wanted to smile sheepishly, but she couldn't. Everything she had read, all this data and information, all this pointed to one thing. That wasn't a teleportation spell I cast, she said softly. It was some kind of world-hopping spell. I'm not in my Equestria anymore. I'm in some sort of completely different one. One where Luna went mad 1,000 years ago. And Celestia stayed sane. Twilight blinked, as her mind, inevitably, started getting metaphysical at the thought. Was there another Twilight in this world? Had she made the same mistakes Twilight had? Brought chaos into the town over an imagined slight? Screwed up her first meeting with the element of magic? Twilight's eyes closed. She reached out to the books around her. One by one, they started blinking out of existence, reappearing in the shelves where she had pulled them from. It wasn't a hard spell, far from it. She practiced it so often over the years that casting it was practically second nature. It didn't interrupt her thoughts at all as she stood once the last book disappeared. She left the children's section of the library, looking instead for public records. The newspapers, as far as she could tell, despite the more advanced technology that this world seemed to possess, the same amount of time had passed since the banishment of Nightmare Moon in this world, as had passed since the banishment of Corona in her own. It had simply advanced a little faster, is all. And that little bit added up over the years. Although on the other hoof, they seemed to have a few holes in their technology. None of their books looked like she had made any mention of telegraphs, for example. Still, the point was, if she was right, she'd be able to look through the newspapers and see if there was a twilight sparkle in this world. She had screwed things up. It took several minutes of searching through the old newspapers, looking through the articles of a periodical called Equestria Daily. She found mention of a small town called Ponyville. There's some miner running loose, and a pony named Twilight Sparkle saving the day. Twilight Sparkle blinked as she looked at the old paper. Ponyville. The small town was ransacked in the early hours of the morning by an Ursa miner. Disturbed from his sleep, wreaked havoc through the town. No pony was injured, but several offensive property damages were dealt with before the beast was safely sent back to the Everfree Forest by none other than Twilight Sparkle, personal steward Princess Celestia, a rumored element of magic. What? Twilight demanded at the top of her lungs. She didn't even hear the shh that came from every pony else in the library as she continued reading. Ursa Meyer, town saved by Twilight Sparkle, personal steward of Princess Celestia. Among the damage was the wagon of that up-and-coming show pony, the great and powerful Trixie! Twilight Sparkle, rumored to be the element of magic. Twilight's mind sat down for several moments, then started up again. She found she was looking through the older newspapers, looking for the articles concerning the return of Nightmare Moon. After 1,000 years of banishment, Nightmare Moon has been destroyed by the elements of harmony, and Princess Luna will be returning to Canterlot in order to resume her duties as the Princess of the Night. Elements wielded by 6 ponies, although the Crown has insisted in keeping their names secret in order to assure privacy for these extraordinary young mares and their stallions, who have... Twilight blinked a few times. There was never Twilight. She was a hero? She was possibly the element of magic? Would it even work? Was it supposed to be Trixie Lilymoon? Wasn't there some kind of destiny thing? Twilight had been out to assume she was wrong, that Trixie did deserve the element. What if she was right? What if, in her world, Trixie was a fraud? Or, she had another possibility, what if, in this world, things were just different? What if Twilight really was the element of magic here? Not because of any predestination, but rather simply because this Twilight had happened to be in the right place at the right time. It, it was too much to think about. Far too much. Twilight put the newspapers back and left the library, trying out the last Swaya back towards Corona. No, the Celestia statue, the white marble alicorn seemed to be smiling down at Twilight, knowingly. The element of magic. Personal student of Princess Celestia. In this world, Twilight hid everything. In her world, she was a wanted criminal, only because of her own actions. This world's Twilight. Was she even the same mayor? Could she even be the same mayor? Was the world she grew up in so different, so alien from the one Twilight knew? Could this world's Twilight Sparkle even be considered in any way the same pony? What if Twilight went to meet her? Ponyville was located in roughly the same place, only a train died away to reach. What would the other Twilight have to say if she met her? What would she say to the other Twilight? What could be said? Would they even be able to relate to each other? And what would the other Twilight? Twilight the hero, the element of magic. Think of the one that had brought the space bear to an unsuspecting, undeserving town. Twilight shivered. It not simply because of the cold. She had a long, pained sigh as she closed her eyes. Her horn glowing, even as she thought of the universe hopping spell. She had her fun. She learned in this alternate world. But enough was enough. It was time to go home. Twilight poured her everything once more into the universe hopping spell. It popped from reality. Then she popped back. Twilight frowned, blinking a few times. That was much less of an experience than her first go at planeswalking. She soon saw, however, that was because she hadn't. Looking down at was the identical Celestia statue, smiling beautifully. Twilight frowned. She tried planeswalking again, and once more appeared exactly the same spot. A moment later, there was no realization of folly, however, hitting everywhere at once. There was no sensation of blackness coming from around her. There was just pop. Twilight disappeared. Pop. Twilight reappeared. Pop, 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 pop. Twilight stopped, breathing heavily. She was certain she was getting the spell right, certain that she had recovered enough magic that she should have been able to cast it. This had been not a problem. She should have been home now. Instead, she was here, on a cold November day, as a white marble statue of Celestia smiled down at her. Twilight stared back. Lips moved of their own accord, uttering two words she didn't want to hear right now. I'm trapped! She stared at the foe Celestia. I'm trapped! She repeated. She shook her head, trotting in place, back and forth as she ran numbers and calculations through her head. The power was right. The spell matrices in her head, beautifully memorized. Her presence in this alternate world proved enough of that. Something was missing. Something was wrong. She didn't know what. She couldn't know what. She didn't know anything about traveling between worlds. All she had was one inescapable truth. I can't go home. Not much to say here, really. Great prelude to everything. Next week, however, the real crisis begins.